Hello. Thank you, Colin, once again for the excellent music. Seriously, I love everything I love everything you play in this chat. Really appreciate you. Yeah, so welcome everyone to the third installment of Expansion Chat. Hope everyone's doing good today. First off, thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate you all for coming out. My name's Marvin, community lead here at Gnosis Guild. For those new here, we're a society for interdependent software and a core contributor to a collection of composable DAO tools called Zodiac. If you've been part of the community for the past couple of months, you'll know we've also been working on, I guess, like an open resource for the DAO ecosystem. We call it zodiac.wiki, which will be home to a shared library of resources, documentation, and a pattern language for DAOs, which will describe common problems and offer practical solutions for the ecosystem. Yeah, so for today's event, we are chatting about privacy and anti-collusion with Rachel Rose O'Leary, Koh Wei Jie, and Auryn from Gnosis Guild. But before we get to introductions, I wanted to quickly mention a few things. First, a reminder that the audio for this chat is being recorded and will eventually be posted online. We'll be posting it on our shiny new website at some point here, which Thor, our new community steward, has posted a link. You can check in the chat there. Second, we'll be in the expansion chat channel. So if you have any questions, comments, or anything else, please drop them there. The level of discussion during these events have been, extremely high, I would say. So I invite you all to continue participating if you feel motivated to do so. And of course, participation can come in the form of links, GIFs, emoji reactions, really whatever. And yeah, lastly, I just want to say the conversation will take on the format of a reading group. So I'll be reading an excerpt from one of several texts, and then we'll discuss together. You'll find a Notion link in the chat too, which Thor just posted, if you want to follow along there or refer to it after the event. But we'll be pasting the excerpts in the chat too, so you won't need to go back and forth. So yeah, as always, we'll monitor for questions throughout, and hopefully we'll find some time at the end for some Q&A. Cool, yeah, so let's move to introductions. Auryn, you want to let folks know who you are, what projects you're working on? Maybe a little background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So hey everyone, I'm Auryn, one of the folks here at Gnosis Guild, working on, I guess we've primarily been working on Zodiac, which is this standard for interoperable, composable DAO tooling. Essentially tries to create a way for all of the existing and hopefully a bunch of new DAO tooling to play nicely together. It has some really nice kind of side effects in terms of the types of DAO designs that it enables. I fell down the kind of crypto Web3 rabbit hole in 2013 and have been kind of totally captivated by the idea of DAOs ever since, and kind of put most of my energy since about 2016 into helping to bring them into the world in various forms. Prior to that, I played basketball professionally, and I don't know, had a pretty weird transition out of basketball into Web3, but I'm super happy that I did, because I'm really loving all of the stuff that I get to contribute to. I guess I should mention as well, side project thing that I've been working on for ages is ClearFund, built on top of Macy, which is the minimal anti-collusion infrastructure that Wei Jie has played a huge part of kind of bringing into the world. ClearFund is a quadratic funding protocol built on chain, and I'm sure I've forgotten some other stuff, but that'll do.
Wei Jie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Wei Jie. So, in a nutshell, I'm a software developer. I've been into space working on smart contracts and ZK circuits for a few years now. Currently, so until the end of last year, I was a contractor with the Ethereum Foundation working on privacy and scaling solutions. So worked a lot on the anti-collusion project that Auryn just mentioned, and before that also a privacy gadget that use ZK snarks to achieve privacy for certain applications. I just want to preface everything I say in this chat that everything I say is my personal opinion and it doesn't reflect anything from previous employers, clients, or co-workers. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Great, thank you. Rose, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Rose, and I've been in crypto since about 2015, when I read the book by Assange, Cypherpunks, which has a very compelling introduction. And in the introduction of the book, he kind of juxtapositions these two trends within technology. One is the kind of this tendency towards surveillance and top-down control, and the other is one that's emancipatory and enabled by encryption. And that text really kind of stuck with me. So I entered the crypto due to that, and with that kind of always at the forefront of my perspective on the space. And I joined CoinDesk in 2017. I worked there for 2 years or so before leaving, traveling to Rojava in northern Syria, studying programming, and then later contributing to the project that I'm now spending all of my time, which is called DarkFi. And DarkFi is a layer one, which is focused on anonymity. And we combine a variety of techniques to achieve anonymity, but the main one, or the big one, is ZK snarks. And we have it is a kind of programmable. It has a VM, so you can deploy anonymous programs on it. So that was what we're working on now. We're at the kind of testnet stage, and yeah, I think that's me in a nutshell. I'll also mention that before crypto, I was working briefly as an artist, and I also was writing some texts on philosophy, and I've kept up that habit. Not so much the art, but the philosophy. I've kept that up. So that's it.
Thank you so much. Oh, I really just love when I hear stories about artists coming into the space and people who are interested in philosophy, because I have that background as well, so I appreciate it. So yeah, welcome and thanks for the intros and joining the discussion. Again, we're talking about privacy and anti-collusion. I think from my perspective, one of the prevailing narratives, particularly among DAOs, but certainly elsewhere too, is that transparency is key to countering exploitation and corruption. That, sort of this mentality of being accountable means giving up your privacy or anonymity. So when I read this excellent piece by Rose titled Lunar Punk and the Dark Side of the Cycle, I was struck by how she frames this tension between transparency and privacy. So this first excerpt I'm about to read is a snippet from the intro to that piece. Crypto is currently energized by a sci-fi called solarpunk. Evolved from cyberpunk, solarpunk is a utopian vision of the future characterized by its optimism. For solarpunks, the future is bright. solarpunk casts away the dystopian shadows of cyberpunk and illuminates a world beyond the chaotic horizon. In Ethereum, solarpunk hackers are creating transparent infrastructures for funding public goods. The imaginary here is simple. Decentralization and transparency will lead to a fairer and more just world. Web3 is creating a new path for humanity, which old institutions will inevitably follow. Solarpunk is crypto's conscious mind. It is bright, self-confident, and future-oriented. Yet the counterpart to solarpunk is lunarpunk skepticism. Lunarpunks are the solar shadow self. They are the unconscious of the cycle. While solarpunks join DAOs, lunarpunks are preparing for war and building privacy-enhanced tooling to protect their communities. So, Rose, I'd love if you could kick off the conversation by speaking on this piece. So, what motivated you to write it, and what is it about privacy that it became such a central focus for what you do?
Absolutely. And thanks for reading that. I mentioned that when I first got into crypto, I had come at it from this, reading the text from Assange, the beginning of his book on the cypherpunks. So I really came into crypto from the perspective of, we need to create tooling which will enable us to protect against this encroaching kind of surveillance apparatus that's consuming the world. So I understood that Bitcoin, which is talked about in the Assange book, was somehow an attempt to do this. And so I was disappointed when I learned that it was transparent. Bitcoin was at one time believed to be anonymous or pseudo-anonymous, but later kind of discovered to be very bad for privacy. And by the time I joined CoinDesk, I was attending a lot of Ethereum events because I was put on the Ethereum beat. And I was surprised then also to see in Ethereum that there wasn't more of an emphasis on the notion of anonymity, and actually that a lot of products that people were building and promoting were closer to what you'd expect to find in a kind of Silicon Valley big data startup setting. You had people talking about, I remember it was in 2018, there was in one of the Ethereum conferences in New York, there was a guy from Microsoft talking about tokenizing the family tree, and then using tokens combined with biometrics to unlock your car or something like this, which I found really disturbing, kind of harrowing. So that was already kind of building in my mind, but it really, I guess, became insurmountable for me personally when I went to Rojava, and that gave a kind of a new gravity to my understanding of why privacy was important, because that's a place where it's a war zone, and if your communications are exposed, it leaves you vulnerable to either information collection by hostile actors, or actually airstrikes. So there's a new kind of severity then and gravity that was entered my consciousness in terms of the question of privacy. And when I returned to Europe, I went directly from Rojava to the Osaka DevCon, and there I attended a panel on privacy, and it was a few different projects that were working in different kind of mixers, and people working on ring signatures on ETH and various other privacy projects. And it's kind of a common question, but someone asked something along the lines of, oh, but aren't these privacy tools kind of just enabling the bad guys, something like this? And there was a discussion then on the panel saying, oh no, we don't want to enable bad guys. You know, we're more interested in enabling good guys. So we actually have and then a kind of discussion about, you know, how we want to self-regulate and so that the bad guys don't use the infrastructure. And I got really upset because I felt like, you know, why did these people have a right to say who's good and who's bad? And that judgment, you know, is very often made by that person in a higher position of power. So like, you know, at the other side of the you know, the for example, in Rojava, you have people who are called bad guys by the other side, kind of thing. But it's a value judgment that doesn't necessarily reflect the reality, and it can be, you know, like just purely oppressive, and so that really disturbed me. And then just the whole kind of discussion of solarpunk that became very popular, I felt it was saturated with the same kind of attitude where there was a very strong consensus about who was the good guys and who was the bad guys. But that consensus was coming from an entirely Western framework. And there was no reflection on whether, you know, there are some people who may be considered bad who would fall within the framework, you know, who would be targets within a fully transparent paradigm. So I really felt that there was too many people who felt themselves to be on the right side of the law, and you know, like by being on the right side of the law, they were also kind of implicit with the system of surveillance that, you know, that I would hope that they would be wanting to work against, and that's why solarpunk always seemed to me something kind of dark. That there was something a bit sinister about solarpunk, a bit predatory. And so I wrote the Lunarpunk article as an attempt to kind of reclaim some territory for you know, essentially shelter from this this fully surveilled landscape. You know, like tree coverage, forests, and yeah, that was why.
I think it's really interesting, and I very much agree. Like the default way that I think a lot of people approach this kind of tension between transparency and privacy is to kind of make this implicit value judgment that by having things be transparent, you enable some essentially way to police things. You know, it means that the bad guys, whoever the bad guys are, their actions are going to be exposed. And so, you know, you'll be able to effectively police those actions. But I think in doing so, it kind of neglects the fact that transparency also enables a whole bunch of bad outcomes. And so there's this kind of implicit decision to when you kind of espouse these kind of transparent systems. There's this implicit acceptance then of the bad side that is enabled by that, and I think that that's massively overlooked in the kind of solar punk movement, but just kind of more broadly by all kinds of folks in many different I guess focuses or areas, that yeah, just by having something be transparent, you're not just kind of exposing the bad actions that people might be trying to route through a system, but you're enabling a whole different class of bad actions because that information is available.
Yeah, I think the narrative is just really strong. Oh, wait, Jed, do you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I want to echo something that Auryn just mentioned in the context of Facebook. I guess I read somewhere in the early days of Facebook, the like Zuckerberg's vision was actually to have as many things as be open as possible, and that's like how he was thinking at the time. Maybe he still thinks the same way now, but is idea that everything should be as transparent as possible. All your personal stuff should be ideally not private and viewed by other people. So I think there's an interesting dimension to this in that we want privacy not only against folks above you in terms of power structures, but you also want privacy from people around you, from your own peers. And I just want to chip in with a bit of a personal view, which is that privacy can come in many forms, as Rose mentioned, and the need for privacy can manifest itself in many diverse ways. Depends on where you are and where your standing is, and like what kind of like territory you are in. Like, are you in a peaceful country, or are you in a war zone, for example? But I think fundamentally there is like a very basic human need for privacy. It's just going to manifest in different ways depending on your social circumstances. That's my 2 cents on this topic right now.
Absolutely. One interesting part that you mentioned there is like it depends on your circumstances, and I think a lot of people think about their circumstances as this kind of static thing. I could sit here and say, like, okay, I live in a Western country with a relatively stable government that, I should be able to trust to do the right thing, whatever the right thing is, kind of thing. But that's not a guarantee that it will always be that way. There's any number of kind of catastrophic events that might change that circumstance, and like I'm obviously very fortunate to be in a place where those circumstances historically have been pretty stable, but there's a bunch of places in the world where that's not necessarily the case. Where your actions today may be permissible under whatever regime exists, but there's not a guarantee that a year from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, the actions that were permissible under some previous regime are now considered to be criminal, and this transparent record that may exist of them end up being the thing that's used to as kind of fodder for persecution. And so I think, like one of the really underrated arguments for more privacy just in general is the uncertainty of what things will be permissible by whoever is in power at some future point in time.
Oops. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I completely agree, and this kind of points to something I discussed also in the article, which is the fragility of transparent systems, where it only takes a small shift in either a regulatory environment or a kind of a geopolitical situation to cause a fully transparent system to be weaponized essentially against users. So yeah, I think that's very well said.
Thank you, Rose. I just wanted to transition a little bit to ZK proofs. I think it's a big topic, and I want to sort of lay a foundation here for the listeners here so that everybody kind of has a shared understanding. So yeah, I'll start by reading this second excerpt, this one from Vitalik, called An Approximate Introduction to How ZK Snarks Are Possible. Perhaps the most powerful cryptographic technology to come out of the last decade is general-purpose, succinct zero-knowledge proofs, usually called ZK snarks. A ZK snark allows you to generate a proof that some computation has some particular output in such a way that the proof can be verified extremely quickly, even if the underlying computation takes a very long time to run. The ZK part adds an additional feature. The proof can keep some of the inputs to the computation hidden. In the context of blockchains, this has two very powerful applications. Scalability. If a block takes a long time to verify, one person can verify it and generate a proof, and everyone can just quickly verify the proof instead. Privacy. You can prove that you have the right to transfer some asset without revealing the link to which asset you received. This ensures security without unduly leaking information about who is transacting with whom to the public. So before we get maybe like, I guess, too into how this cryptographic technology can be applied, I'd love if we could, sort of just talk about ZK proofs themselves. So what are ZK proofs? How do they work?
It's a really good question, and I'm just gonna maybe touch on like the I'm just gonna echo some of the basic foundations. Very simply put, it's like you can think of it as sort of like the signature of a computation, where you prove that you've done a certain computation correctly, where some of the inputs to that computation are hidden. But anybody else can verify very quickly that you've done this computation correctly. And so you basically get from this a kind of like a cryptographic proof of certain kind of integrity, where and you also get privacy depending on how it's applied. There's a lot of very advanced math that goes on behind the scenes, and then different kinds of ZK proof systems with different trade-offs. So, so for example, if you talk about ZK snarks, the trade-off is that you have to have trusted setup, which is a kind of ceremony that requires a bunch of people to take turns to compute some kind of hidden value. And with other proof systems like ZK Starks, STARKS, there's no need for this trusted setup, but it's much more expensive to verify these proofs. So it depends on your use case, and it depends on whether your blockchain supports verification of these ZK proofs. It also depends on your computing infrastructure, like whether it's able to effectively support generating lots and lots of proofs effectively. There's just a lot to cover in this topic, so I just want to bring this back to ask you, Marvin, maybe how can we hone in on a subtopic to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about the sort of the cultural blockers that prevent or slow adoption, I think about, things like complexity and accessibility, and even just like maybe the language we use. There's ZK snarks, starks. I think I saw like snarks, ZK snarks. So yeah, ZK proofs in particular seem to have a reputation for being complex and confusing. I mean, I guess in general, like, what are the near-term barriers for adoption? How do you feel about that?
That's a really good question. I think if you look at some projects like Tornado Cash, I can't speak for them, but my personal opinion is that they've done a great job with their user interface, in the sense that it's well designed, that the instructions are clear, even though the underlying technology is tricky. And the underlying techniques require a lot of nuance to understand. I think they've done a good job in communicating what you need to do as a user, and what are the various ways that you can do to enhance your privacy even as you use Tornado Cash. So I think what's needed is better communication, very clear descriptions of how things work and what you should do as a user. And also engineers should be super aware about users' needs. I think this boils down to user experience 101. Even no matter how complex your system is, you have to have the user in mind at the end of the day. And I think this applies not just to ZK proofs, but also to any kind of software system.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I can follow on with that a little bit. I think so I play with ZKPs insofar as we build on top of Macy, but I mean I effectively treat it as a black box. I know what I have a reasonable understanding of the kind of guarantees that it gives us about what kind of information goes in and what kind of information comes out. But what happens in the middle is magic moon math from my perspective. And I think that's probably the case for the vast majority of users. So I think being able to effectively communicate what a system is intended to do and kind of what the assumptions and guarantees that it makes are is the really key pieces that need to be communicated. The kind of how it does it is probably irrelevant for the vast majority of users, and I think that's the same for most technologies. Most people don't necessarily care about how something happens. They care about kind of what the end results are, and what assumptions they're making in kind of using it, or what risks or kind of trust assumptions they're making in kind of adopting that piece of technology.
I just want to add to that I think with ZK proofs we are quite early, and a lot of the reasons why there's kind of obscurity and almost like a fear of ZK proofs and their complexity is because, I mean, on the one hand, there is heavy math involved, but on the other hand, a lot of it has come very newly, kind of fresh from academia, where they have a different kind of culture in like academic math, cryptography, for example, of communicating than we do in as programmers. So like when it's a math paper, it's usually very succinct. There's not much explanation. It's assumed that your level of knowledge is already very high. And so they can be very impenetrable. And the earliest types of ZK proofs and kind of documentation around ZK proofs was very much of this type. But I think we're beginning to reach the point now where there's been a fair amount of development of ZK proofs. So it's kind of transitioning from the academic world into the world of programmers, where programmers have values of kind of wanting to explain things simply to each other in a way that other developers can understand, and to be able to indeed build without necessarily understanding the underlying math. And then I think we're going to enter a new phase, or we have slightly entered, but we will continue to enter the phase of actually what will the user experience of this be, and how much does the user need to know in order to interact, and as we have seen with Tornado Cash already.
Yeah, maybe we should head there. This third excerpt kind of speaks to that a little bit. So, yeah, so this one's from the Congressional Research Institute, an independent think tank from, I think it was Massachusetts, that focuses exclusively on inclusive representation. It comes from a feature called How the Secret Ballot Ended the Gilded Age, which contains over 200 academic citations related to secret voting. Definitely worth a scroll. Yeah, so one of my favorites of these citations, I think, has resonance with actually Rose's framing it. As occurs so often in the course of American reform movements, light is presented as the solution to corruption, which occurs in secret and in darkness. Light is the great disinfectant. But of course, what that reasoning applied to this circumstance meant was that every individual vote would be an even more visible, even more a public declaration for any interested observer to see, just as any observer at a viva voce election could hear every vote. Transparency, not secrecy, was a solution to the ills of American politics. It would take another generation for the opposite view to take hold, that the solution to the ills of American politics was secrecy, not visibility, and not transparency. but voting as a private act in a ballot box that shielded every vote from scrutiny. So, transparency has been maybe like an undercurrent of much of this rise in crypto-based communities, and the ecosystem sort of utopic fervor seems to be supported, or at least, kind of enlivened by this narrative of visibility and transparency. Can you all give a little context to the extent to which ZK proofs and other privacy tools are being built? Does anyone have a sense of the scope here? Like, for example, when and where are we likely to see the earliest win case or killer app for ZK snarks?
I think ClearFund's a killer app.
I didn't want to say it myself, but yeah, I mean, I think this latest round of ClearFund definitely demonstrates that a little bit. Well, I mean, I think that really, like, the underlying technology Macy there is the kind of killer part of that, the actual part that enables secret voting. But ClearFund is just kind of one of many possible applications built on that framework. And really, I'm really excited to see what will presumably be this kind of huge, explosion of different use cases and applications built on that same framework. But yeah, so I mean, in terms of like practical applications of it, it's out in the wild already. Macy and ClearFund are kind of one example of that. There's a handful of other protocols and projects focused on secret voting as well. Another one that I'm aware of is it's Vocdoni. They have a different approach, but similar kind of goals. And then, yeah, there's a handful of other kind of secret networks attempting to enable secret transactions, secret voting, secret smart contracts. Obviously, DarkFi is a good example of that. Secret Network is another with a very different approach. And we've already talked a lot about Tornado Cash. There's also things like Umbra and many others that I can't pull out of a hat right away. But yeah, it's definitely something that's growing, but it's already out in the wild.
I really like to chip in with some perspective, just a quick perspective here. I want to unpack the three things, three concepts I mentioned: transparency, secrecy, and I want to introduce this term integrity. I just want to make it super clear that, like, when we talk about like secret voting or private voting, might not necessarily be talking about privacy or secrecy here. I think we should just be more precise in what we are saying. So my first point is that when people say they want like a voting process to be transparent, I think they actually mean that they want the process to have integrity. That they don't want cheating to happen. And I think you can have a voting process where cheating cannot happen, even if the votes are not known to each of the participants. So you only know your own vote. And I think that's perfectly fair to say that you can have this system, but you don't necessarily call it a secret vote. You can just say it's a vote of integrity. In the case of Macy, I think we also have to be clear about where the privacy comes in, and what are the guarantees that it claims to have about it wants to have about integrity. So Macy uses ZK snarks to ensure the correctness of the computation and tallying of votes, and it does have a feature where votes are encrypted such that a briber cannot see what someone else voted for, and therefore there's no point for them to collude with them to bribe them to ask them to vote for someone that you want to vote for. However, in the current version of Macy, the coordinator is able to decrypt the votes. So we have to be careful when we say whether the votes are secret or not, because it's to whom is it secret? It's certainly secret to non-colluding actors. It's certainly secret to like random participants. But if but currently, if the coordinator colludes with bribers, then we have an issue here, which is something that future versions of Macy can hopefully solve by decentralizing the coordinator. But we have to get there when we get there. Yeah, so I just threw that in because I just want us to pick out terms a bit more with a bit more clarity. As much as I love what we're working on, I think we should have some precision here. Yeah, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I really appreciate the kind of disambiguation there between, or the kind of decoupling of integrity from transparency, because I can very much mirror this kind of experience in having discussions with people about essentially secret voting. The almost kind of for anyone that kind of objects to it, almost universally the objection is, well, how do we know that the results are correct? So the people seem to be less concerned about how people voted and more concerned about ensuring that the outcome of the vote is computed with integrity, is kind of the result of the inputs, regardless of whether or not you can see them. And yeah, so it's a really important kind of concept to decouple. The other kind of pushback that I get a lot from people when I've had this discussion is to do with accountability. Is particularly kind of important in delegative or representative kind of voting systems, where you might be delegating a vote to someone else, or you might be voting in a representative to kind of vote on your behalf. And there's a lot of concern from people. The kind of second most common objection is like, how do I hold them accountable? How do I hold this person that I've trusted with my vote weight accountable to their votes if I can't tell how they voted? And I guess my response to that is always that you should hold those kind of delegates or representatives accountable to the outcomes that they affect, as opposed to the way that they vote. I'm keen to get a feel from you guys how, I don't know, in your experience discussing these things with people, if you've had a similar experience with the objections that people have, and then how you approach resolving those objections.
I just want to jump in and quickly answer the last question before I move on to this one, because I wanted to say that DarkFi, we're about to launch our testnet, but we also have a minimal viable product of an anonymous DAO using ZK snarks. So very soon, I hope this will be available on testnet. It's a very limited kind of limited example of a DAO, but it will become more featureful over time. But essentially, it hides the votes and the voters, so whoever's voting, and the treasury. So the votes are complete. Everything about the DAO is hidden and anonymous. And we've also approached the kind of what a DAO is holistically. So we're not just thinking about the kind of wallet where the money is stored, but also how do people coordinate around the DAO. So we have a peer-to-peer messenger. We have a peer-to-peer task manager. So these are other kind of coordination primitives that are required if we want to move away from centralized proprietary infrastructures like Discord and Notion. But in regards to your other question, I think that anonymous DAOs is very crucial. I really like the quote that you read about the secrecy in votes and the kind of misconception that transparency would lead to better outcomes automatically. So I think transparency in DAOs, it's a very obvious problem in that it changes, it creates a game theoretical problem where it changes the behavior of the DAO. So the votes, the outcome of the votes may be different given the fact that the votes are known and the voters are known. That, we found this to be the case very much while working on AssangeDAO, where, the original goal of AssangeDAO was to free Assange by all means necessary. But when we got to that point, we discovered that actually we were trapped because we are on Ethereum in this, what I call like a desert landscape where everything is known. We couldn't coordinate to free Assange by all means necessary because our moves were known almost in advance. So it was a kind of stalemate by virtue of the transparency. And another thing that I also learned in AssangeDAO is the risk of state-level infiltration. So I think anonymous DAOs, they can actually do more to resist capture. For example, they can resist jurisdictional capture by not coupling with a real-life foundation or other legal structure. And, they will also need to evolve their own concepts to, or new concepts to think about, okay, how do we protect the DAO from being captured by rogue actors, bad actors? So there's a lot to DAOs, and we're working with Stellar Magnus, who's a kind of at the forefront of DAO research to add to these questions of like, what does a DAO need really to reach that level of really enabling human coordination at a new level. And so what are the missing steps for DAOs? I think anonymity is definitely one of them. And there's other parameters that need to be looked at as well.
Hey, Rose. Greg, one of our beloved community members, has a question for you. Says, I'm curious if Rose is building DAOs which are only anonymous from the outside, or if they support fully anonymous membership and/or pseudonymous participation.
Yep. So we definitely endorse pseudonymous participation. Like for example, the chat that we've built, you can change your username as many times as you want. So you can appear to be different people. However, the other thing I mentioned, again, the DAO that we've just designed is very, very bare bones, basic. You get the votes, you make the transaction happens, all in ZK. So later it's going to become more featureful, and we can make custom DAOs. Again, work with Stellar Magnet to kind of scope this out. But one of the things we'll do at that stage is like, okay, can you do something like a tiered membership where you have, again, anonymous participants, but that they only enter to the level where they can actually, participate in sending money around if they've, exhibited a certain amount of, if they've built trust essentially within the community. But yes, for sure, like we would have different kinds of DAOs. Some might be friends who know each other, or comrades who know each other. Others might be more open and have pseudo-anonymous or anonymous participants.
Thank you. I guess we're sort of entering the Q&A portion here. Because Unipuff, another beloved member of the community, has a question too. This is for everybody, but also specifies especially for Rose. I'd like to know the speaker's thoughts on projects like NYM and the use of mixed nets for data privacy preservation.
Sure, I can
Does
start.
anyone want to speak? Yeah,
I can start. Yeah, NIM. I know NIM. I'm they're good friends of ours, comrades. They the metadata. The problem with metadata is completely overlooked by majority of blockchain projects. So it's super essential. and I think NIM's doing a great work with mixnets, and we're definitely going to have NIM as an option for among our other metadata transport methods.
Thank you. Auryn, Wei Jie, do you all want to weigh in on anything here?
I don't have any specific thoughts on NIM, just because I'm not super familiar with it, but I do generally like the idea of mixnets. I think they can be super useful. I've thought about them a lot in the context of ClearFund. So like one of the pieces of information that is kind of leaked right now when you participate in ClearFund is how much you contribute to a round. Just because you make a token transfer to the funding round, and so we've thought a lot about, in the past at least, thought a lot about how you could potentially use some type of mixer to obfuscate how much you contribute to a round. And it would essentially imply making many small standard size contributions, probably from various different accounts, and potentially kind of allowing users to withdraw some of those contributions from multiple accounts to multiple other accounts or something like that. Maybe that's getting too into the weeds though. But yes, in general, mixnets, I really like the idea of. The other kind of use case within the context of ClearFund is for casting votes. So like right now, when you cast a vote, you essentially just do it from, you're writing a message to the Macy contract, and our application just kind of prompts the user to do it from the same address they voted with. But the Macy contracts don't restrict that in any way. Any address can post a vote as long as you have the correct Macy key. And so I think there's an opportunity there to use some either mixer or relay to obfuscate that traffic as well, to make it much harder to correlate a message being posted, essentially votes being cast, with a particular address that contributed to the round.
Yeah, thanks. Several people are commenting. Oh, Wei Jie, do you want to go ahead?
Oh no, nothing much to add. I'm not super familiar with mixnets myself, so nothing much to add here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, several people are talking in the chat here. I'll let their questions come in, but yeah, in the meantime, maybe I'll just read the last excerpt. We have 5 minutes left. Yeah, this one comes from Rose again. Revisits the piece that started this conversation. In the lunar punk imaginary, a conflict between crypto and existing power structures is essentially pre-programmed. Regulation forces crypto underground. Anonymity proliferates. In the interstellar darkness, freshly radicalized crypto factions create a new kind of democratic society. This conflict is repressed in solar punk psychology. The lunar cycle is rejected as a bearish nightmare. Its foundational conflict, nation-states banning crypto, is called FUD because it produces fear, the kind of fear that compels people to grab their money and run. As the super cycle segments, solar punk repression is mounting. The optimism of solar punk has become synonymous with bull market cycles, while pessimism is associated with the bear. Lunar punk offers something beyond this simple oscillation. It is a moment of insight between market cycles, a glitch in the hologram where the source code shines through. I love this excerpt because I think it speaks pretty well, actually, to our current moment. So what is going to shift crypto culture, which has had to embrace a pro-transparency stance, to be more aligned with this privacy-first ethos?
I think it's going to be some bad outcome that will ultimately kind of be a wake-up call, which is a real shame to say, but I think it's to a certain extent seems to be human nature, where people are willfully ignorant of the things that they're doing that could potentially lead to bad outcomes, and only willing to pay attention to them once it affects them directly. And so I think there's a really good chance that this type of technology does not get serious attention until some kind of widespread bad outcome, some outcome that kind of affects a really large number of people in the space negatively as a result of the kind of current tendency towards transparency.
Yep, totally agree. But actually, I also think that it's possible that the work into privacy is also going to, in some ways, be a catalyst for this event that causes people to shift to privacy. Because I see that there's a kind of feedback between surveillance and anonymity techniques, where the kind of more sophisticated surveillance becomes, the more advanced anonymity must be. And in the same way, as we move further into these, extremely powerful anonymity techniques like ZK proofs, the surveillance might try and increase its capabilities in kind of lockstep. So if that does happen, I think that it could trigger some kind of a conflict between the two worlds, and that's what we call the emergence of DarkFi and RegFi. The kind of the space will split in two. Yep, that's the future we have in mind.
Logonaut has a question. What might be the implications of ZKP in campaign finance? Might they enable, quote unquote, dark money 2.0?
So I think this is a really great example of the type of objection that we often see to systems that kind of issue transparency. Ideal case for I mean, it's perhaps less possible when you're talking about financial transactions. But ideal case in the context of something like voting is that the voter is unable to prove how they voted, and so kind of collusion around vote buying, bribery, that kind of thing is becomes a much more trustful relationship. I think if you can do the same thing for financial transactions, essentially make them much more trustful, then the kind of dark money scenario there, the idea of funding campaigns, secretly funding campaigns, becomes much more difficult. But I also think that there's for something like a campaign, it's maybe, yeah, I don't know, actually, I think it's difficult, or it's at least more difficult when you're talking about money flows than things like votes. Rose maybe has some better insight on that from the DarkFi side in terms of how you might combat that in a way that doesn't mean just enabling kind of everyone to see how money is flowing, or whether it's even a good idea.
Indeed. I don't have a solution for that off the top of my head, but I also don't think it's kind of such an issue that it would be worth de-anonymizing transactions for. And there's a few things like this which, you just kind of have to let go. Like, I mean, some might be technical problems that we can solve in time, but others are kind of paradoxes that emerge with anonymity that we just kind of need to accept and work with. But it's, yeah, that would be my response.
I guess one other part of that is that there's, to a certain extent, a kind of democratizing effect here, where like if you are well enough capitalized currently, I think there are ways for you to move money in ways that are secret, or at least kind of very well obfuscate the flow of funding. But that becomes kind of less and less possible the less well capitalized you are, with the exception, I guess, of handing chunks of cash around. But that is more than likely kind of relatively small scale. And so by having secret money, you essentially kind of democratize access to this, as opposed to it being something that is only available to a certain very well to a certain class of people.
Yep, nicely said.
All right. Well, we're running up on time, and I want to be mindful about everybody's schedules. So I just wanted to thank you all so much for this incredible conversation. Chat, please show your love to our guests. Wei Jie, Rose, Auryn, really appreciate you all taking the time to speak on such an important topic. You all are, really, truly inspiring to me as I did research over the last month or so. I'm just super inspired by all of you. So thank you so much for coming out, and really appreciate it. Any parting thoughts or upcoming projects you want to share with the community before we bust out?
Thank you so much. I would just encourage everyone to check out DarkFi, dark.fi, read our manifesto. It's on our webpage, and check out our GitHub. We have a really beautiful, well-crafted code, in my opinion. That's it. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Wei Jie. Okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming out and participating in the chat. We have a lot of exciting projects and initiatives that are just on the cusp of being released. A ton of stuff. Our inaugural NFT, some new Zodiac mods, a revamped weekly sync, what else? A Web3 writing platform. So yeah, please stay tuned to our socials, and of course follow our guests as well. All right. Well, thanks all. Really appreciate it. Thanks, and enjoy your day.